Hello, welcome to the channel. This video is about relative clause. Let's get started. This is a new chapter. We are going to talk about color yellow, but this color yellow is in a full sentence. Let's take a look. What are they? Relative clauses. Alright, so relative clause is used to give more information about a color blue, a noun. And relative clauses contain verbs. However, if they're standing alone, it doesn't really make sense on their own. For example, one of the biggest sporting events in Hong Kong is the city's marathon race, which takes place in February each year. This color yellow is telling you more about the marathon race. However, if it is standing alone, actually it is hard to understand what it actually refers to. Then, what's the reason of using relative clauses? Let's take a look. Reasons of using relative clauses: we use relative pronouns such as that, which, who, whom, and whose, or relative adverbs when, where, why, to link a relative clause to the main clause in a sentence, like this. An observation deck that allows visitors to enjoy the greatest race on earth, which includes 4 marathons. Runners who take part in the marathon. The Queen of England, to whom Hong Kong was ceded. The skyscrapers whose top floors are occupied. The point where runners retrace their steps. There are 2 different types of relative clauses. What are they? Let's take a look. One of the types are defining relative clauses, which identify the color blue. Example: runners who take part in the marathon pass some Hong Kong's prominent landmarks. Who take part in the marathon is telling you more about the runner, which identified its color blue. Then, what is the other type of relative clauses? Let's take a look. Non-defining relative clauses, which just give extra information about the color blue. For example, the event is the final leg of the greatest race on earth, which includes 4 marathons across Africa and Asia. Which includes 4 marathons across Africa and Asia is telling you, alright, the final leg of the greatest race on earth. So in this chapter, we will go through a little bit deeper about defining relative clauses as well as non-defining relative clauses. Let's take a look at the following essay and how many different relative clauses are using. Let's take a look. Sample essay: the Hong Kong Marathon. Okay, one of the biggest sporting events in Hong Kong is the city's marathon race, which takes place in February each year. The event is the final leg of the greatest race on earth, which includes 4 marathons across Africa and Asia. The marathon starts early in the morning. What time? When most people are still sleeping. Okay, so runners who take part in the marathon. Which runner who take part in the marathon pass some of Hong Kong's prominent landmarks. The race starts on Nathan Road, which is one of the busiest streets in Hong Kong. So, what is Nathan Road? Extra information, which is one of the busiest streets in Hong Kong. Before making a turn and heading up to the West Kowloon Highway, runners pass by the International Commerce Center. The skyscrapers. What skyscrapers? Whose top floors are occupied by a luxury hotel. Has an observation deck that allows visitors to enjoy a spectacular views of the city. This is the second part of relative clauses. Today we talk about 3 different things. Number 1, defining relative clauses. as well as some relative pronouns such as which, why, and that, and also some relative adverbs. Let's take a look. Defining relative clauses. So, some relative clauses used to identify a color blue, and the color blue in the main clause, like this. Okay, so for example, they are used to say exactly what or who we are talking about. Example, the runner, what runner, who is in the lead, is starting to look tired. Without this part, who is in the lead, it is not clear which runner we are talking about. So this phrase, who is in the lead, is defining relative clause. Also, some people call it identifying relative clauses. Then how do we use relative pronouns? Let's take a look. How many are there? Relative pronouns such as that, which, who, whom, whose. How to use them? We use them to introduce relative clauses. First, the word that or which. First, the word that and which for things. Example, we want to see the film. Which you recommend or that you recommend. That is some little difference between using that and which. For the word which, we have only one of this item and we mention this particular item, then we use the word which. However, if we have a bunch of items and the one we just mentioned is just one of them, then we use the word that. Alright, let's take a look at some other things. We use relative pronouns who for people. The word that is sometimes also possible, but using the word who is absolutely much better. For example, they knew the runner who finished last in the race. We could also use another relative pronouns whom when we refer to object of a verb of a color red. But this is rather formal or quite old-fashioned. In modern English, we simply use the word who instead of whom. Okay, the example, the runner whom they supported finished last, or the runner who they supported finished last. Okay, then the next one, whose. Whose show possessions. Something belongs to that particular blue. It replaces possessive adjective like mine, your, his, her, its, or possessive apostrophe s in relative clauses. Do you know the boy? Whose essay? So, the essay belongs to the boy, whose essay was published in the Young Post. Also, after prepositions, it's better to use the word whom. Let's take a look. The runner, for whom they were cheering, won the race. Now, bear in mind, this is actually a prepositional phrase, function like a color yellow, telling you more about the runner. This whole part is a color yellow, prepositional phrase. However, inside this color yellow, whom they were cheering, it's just part of the prepositional phrase, but it is a color blue, a noun clause. Now, although the question word whose is used for people when you are asking a question, however, when it is using as a relative pronouns, we could describe it for things as well as people. Let's take a look. The actor is in a TV series whose name I don't remember. Then how do I use relative adverbs and what are they? Let's take a look. We also use relative adverbs such as where, when, and why to introduce relative clauses. Very straightforward. The word where is for places. That's the restaurant where I met him. Where I met him. This relative clause is telling you more about the restaurant we are talking about. We use when for time. I remember the day when I met him. When I met him is telling you more about the day. And why is for reasons. But I can remember the reason why I agreed to meet him. There's one more thing we have to be careful about the relative adverbs where. After the relative adverbs where, we don't finish it with a prepositions. Let's take a look. This is the town where I grew up. But we can't say this is the town where I grew up in. So you can see, consider changing to up like this. Okay? Otherwise, it will be having a mistake. Today, we talk about non-defining relative clauses. Let's take a look how many different areas we have to take care about. There are 4 areas we have to take care about. The first one is talking about the usage of relative pronouns whose and whom. Second, putting a comma before a non-defining relative clauses. And also, never use commas with defining clauses. And the last one, we do not use relative pronouns that in non-defining relative clauses. So first of all, we talk about what is non-defining relative clauses. Let's take a look at the following examples. People use non-defining relative clauses, also called non-identifying relative clauses, to provide more information. Now, unlike defining relative clauses, information in a non-defining clauses is not important. If we remove it, the sentence will still make sense. Example, David, who is a really nice guy, is the best student in the team. Now, it refers to David is the best student in the team, and by the way, he's a nice guy. Another example, the bike, which was red, crashed into a tree. Now, you can see, for people, we use who. For things or animal, we use which. Then, how about for possessions and for objects? Let's take a look. For people, we use whose for possessions. And for objects of verbs or prepositions, we use whom in the non-defining relative clauses. Example, Stephen, whose father is also very cheerful. Stephen's father. So, Stephen, whose father is also very cheerful, is telling more about Stephen's belongings, Stephen's possessions. Is the best student in the team. Stanley, with whom I go to school, is a very nice person. So, I go to school with Stanley. So, with whom is actually what we means of objects of verbs or prepositions. So you can see, using non-defining relative clauses in a sentence, we use a comma. If the relative clauses in the middle of a sentence, at the beginning of the relative clauses, we have a comma. And also, at the end of it, we also put a comma. Let's take a look at this example. People always place a comma before a non-defining relative clause. When the non-defining relative clause is in the middle of a sentence, we also put a comma after it. Example, Hong Kong Marathon. The Hong Kong Marathon, which takes place in February each year, and you can see, before the relative clauses, we have a comma. After it, we also have another. Is one of the important sporting events in the city. We remind you guys that every time we use a non-defining relative clauses in a sentence, we have to put comma. If it is at the end, the relative clauses is putting at the end, then a comma is putting in front of the relative clauses. But in the middle, then we put a comma before the relative clauses as well as at the end of the relative clauses. Now, Let's take a look at the third point. We always use commas with non-defining clauses. We never use a comma with defining clauses. Because if we forget the commas in a non-defining clauses, the meaning will change. Example, the Hong Kong Marathon, which or that takes place in February, is a big sporting event. If you do not have a comma before the relative clauses, the meaning will be slightly different. There is more than one Hong Kong Marathon. Only one in February is a big sporting event. And the last one, about the usage of the relative pronoun that. Let's take a look. We do not use the relative pronoun that in non-defining relative clauses. The car that was blue crashed into a tree. It is a wrong sentence. If we are using non-defining relative clauses, we have to change the word that to become which. Last time we talked about defining relative clauses and non-defining relative clauses. This time we talk about what situations we could use without relative pronouns and what situation we could not live it without. Let's take a look at the following examples. Defining relative clauses often leave out the relative pronouns who, which, that, and whom. But it is not usually to do it in non-defining clauses. Now, we could do this only when pronouns is the object. What does it mean of object? Let's take a look. He's the boy who I am doing the project with. We can change it to he's the boy I'm doing the project with. We can leave the relative pronouns who, because the word who is referring to the object I am doing the project with. With what? The boy. The boy is the object. So only when the relative pronouns who is referring to an object, we can leave it and make the sentence become he's the boy I'm doing the project with. Another example, I've got a dictionary that you can borrow. You can borrow what? You can borrow a dictionary. A dictionary is an object, and it is also the word that the relative pronouns refer to. If the pronouns or a noun after a relative pronouns, then the object we can leave it without. However, it is not possible if it is a subject. Let's take a look. What's the meaning? He's got a dictionary which is quite old. So here, which is quite old. The dictionary is quite old. The word which, the relative pronoun, is referred to the subject. The dictionary is quite old, so it is impossible for us to leave these away. Relative pronouns, we use the subject, the dictionary, we can't leave it out. That's another way to talk about the relative pronoun whom. Let's take a look what situation we could apply. He's the boy with whom I'm doing the project. It's a very formal and unusual way in spoken English, but in written English, it is really common. Some students make mistake in the exam by not filling the relative pronouns properly. Let's take a look at the situation. 2012, paper 2. Student lost marks because they left out the relative pronouns in sentences where they were needed. For example, people live supposed to be people who lived, because that's the subject. There are many companies claim that they are using, should be companies that claim. Make sure you learn how to use relative pronouns correctly. There is some situation we could take away the relative pronouns. Let's take a look. We sometimes make a relative clause even shorter by leaving out the verb be as well as the relative pronouns. When you see the verb to be as well as the relative pronouns, like this. Example, the marathon starts on Nathan Road which is one of the busiest streets in Hong Kong, become the marathon star on Nathan Road, one of the busiest streets in Hong Kong. And the other example, she likes books and films that are set in space. She likes books and films set in space. That is some other situation. We can change a relative clauses into participial phases. Let's take a look what situation we can do that. We can shorten a relative clause by removing the relative pronouns and changing the verb to the present participle, ing form. First situation, when we talk about habits or continuous action. People who travel to work by train save a lot of money, become people traveling to. When we talk about wish, athletes who wish to take part in the marathon should sign up now. Athletes wishing to. In non-defining relative clauses, when we use wish, desire, or want, or even hope, or any other verb to do with thinking or knowing, then we can change it with an ing form. One unfortunate runner who did not know the route ended up at the peak tower. Become one unfortunate runner not knowing the route ending up at the peak tower. That's all for today. Like this video and subscribe to our channel. See you next time. Goodbye.